Hi everyone and welcome back. In this video we'll be reading another chapter of Christopher Robin by Disney. Chapter 13. Madeline was beginning to think that this exposition was going to be harder than she had thought. They had made it through town and the train station without much trouble, but once they arrived at the station things got a bit more complicated. Madeline knew she couldn't just walk up to the window with 4 talking animals. Luckily, Pooh knew what to do after his earlier train adventure with Christopher. "Now we play nap time," Pooh said, quickly explaining how the game was played. As the animals went floppy in her arms, Madeline approached the ticket counter. "1 ticket, please," she requested, "and a map of London." Reaching into her pocket for money to pay, Madeline accidentally dropped Eeyore. He landed on the ground with a thud. "Ow," he mumbled. "Figures." Plastering a smile on her face, Madeline quickly shoved the money at the attendant. Then grabbing the ticket and the map, she darted off. They needed to get on the train before anything else like that happened. Luckily, they made it onto the train and found an empty compartment. Settling in, Madeline quickly ordered 5 cups of tea, much to the porter's confusion, and then sat back as the train began to roll out of the station and into the surrounding countryside. Beside her, Pooh sat happily eating some honey, while the others took in the landscape, except for Piglet, who was feeling a bit sick due to the rocking motion of the train. As the train chugged toward the city, a light rain began to fall. It fell against the windows, making a nice rhythmic pattern. A gray sky made the warmly lit compartment feel even more inviting and cozy. If it hadn't been for poor Piglet not feeling well, it would have been a perfectly lovely expedition. Don't think about it, Piglet," Tigger said, as the little pig tried not to throw up. "I know. I'll have that raindrop," he added, pointing to a big droplet of water on the outside of the window. "And you'll have this one. Race you to the bottom." "It's worth a try," Piglet stammered, focusing on the window. As the 2 friends began cheering on the raindrops, Madeline watched them smiling. Then her smile faded. "There's going to be no fun like this at boarding school, Pooh," she said softly. For a short while she had been able to forget about the real world that awaited her once they left the country house. But now as the city skyline appeared on the horizon, as she saw what fun her new friends were having, she couldn't help feeling a wave of sadness. "Well, why not go?" Pooh said, as though that were obvious. Madeline looked thoughtful. "If I can get these papers to Father," she said, her voice growing excited, "maybe he'll be so happy he won't make me go. Dreams don't come for free, Pooh. You've got to fight for them." She paused, her father's words coming back to her. "Nothing comes from nothing." Pooh nodded. "Oh yes," he agreed, misinterpreting Madeline. "Nothing always leads to the very best something." "What?" Madeline said, the idea sounding foreign to her. Doing nothing was not an option in her house. "Who told you that?" Pooh's answer surprised her. "Christopher Robin," he said. Madeline shook her head. "That doesn't sound like Father," she said. "That's because it's me, Pooh speaking," Pooh replied, his tone innocent. Madeline began to smile despite herself, but then the bear went on. "He also said he's only happy if you're happy." Madeline's smile faded completely. Now that was something that definitely did not sound like her father. "I think you're mistaken, Pooh," she said, trying not to cry. But Pooh shook his head. "Oh, we heard him say it, all right. Or my name's not Winnie the Pooh, which is. So there you are." Just then Piglet let out a shout as his raindrops slid down the window first. Madeline looked over, happy for the distraction. She wanted to believe Pooh, but if her father cared so much about her, why was he always working instead of playing with her? And why, if he cared, would he want to send her away to boarding school? She turned and looked at the city looming in the distance. She didn't know the answers, at least not yet. But maybe, just maybe, if she helped him save his job and those of his cohorts, she might just get him to change his mind. Unfortunately, before Madeline could even think about changing her father's mind, she had to get from the train station to Winslow luggage, which meant she had to get a cab and somehow get the 4 animals to the building without being seen. Getting the cab turned out to be easy enough. Madeline had seen her parents do it enough times before to know how to hail a big black car and then give the address of a destination. What turned out to be nearly impossible, however, was making sure that the 4 animals by her side didn't blow their cover. Besides Pooh, none of the animals had been to London before, and they wanted to watch to see everything as it passed by the taxi's windows. Papa Yap Tigger looked out the window, but instead of seeing the buildings outside, he got sight of his reflection. Thinking he was seeing another Tigger, he stared open-mouthed. "Hey, what the—" "Tigger!" Piglet hissed nervously. He looked over at the taxi driver just as the man's eyes returned to the road in front of him. He had definitely been looking at the back seat through the rear-view mirror. "What are you doing?" "I just saw the most preposterous imposter," Tigger said. Hearing voices, the cabbie glanced back over his shoulder. "What's that, love?" he asked. Madeline gulped. "Oh, nothing," she said, trying to sound completely normal and not at all like a young girl traveling alone in a taxi with 4 talking animals. "Just talking to myself." Then she leaned down and whispered to Tigger's ear, "Tigger, be quiet." But Tigger was not good at being quiet, even in a normal situation. When presented with a possible imposter, well, it was downright impossible. Even before Madeline could sit back, he was bouncing on his tail again. This time he got his image in the side view mirror of the taxi. "There's another one! Look at him! His eyes are too close together." "Tigger!" Madeline whispered as loudly as she dared. But the animal didn't even pretend to listen. He was far too focused on the other Tigger and the creature's flaws. "Look at that silly stripy hat and his little cauliflower ears." Tigger was growing more and more agitated. His paws were up in front of his nose and he was bouncing from the floor to the seat and back again as he tried to determine where the other Tigger was. Every time he bounced, the whole taxi shook. Trying to see what the commotion was and how one little girl could be making his taxi shake, the cab driver caught sight of Tigger. He did a double take. But just as he looked back, Tigger ducked down again. The cabbie shook his head. He needed to lay off the caffeine and get some sleep. He was beginning to see things. "I'm going to teach this copycat a lesson," Tigger hissed from the floor of the taxi. Piglet gulped. He had seen that look in Tigger's eyes before. Nothing good came from that look. Just then, Tigger leaped up at the window, but as he jumped, he also let out a roar. This time, when the cabbie turned around, there was no denying that he was not seeing things. There was, in fact, an orange and black striped creature leaping and jumping around the back of his taxi. So the cabbie did what a person in his situation would do. He screamed and swerved right into oncoming traffic. Letting out another scream, he quickly wrenched the steering wheel back, narrowly missing a head-on collision with another taxi. In the back seat, Madeline and the animals went flying back and forth as the taxi continued its wild ride down the street. "I'm never leaving the wood again," Piglet cried, trying to clutch his now very upset stomach, while somehow holding onto the door handle. Tigger, meanwhile, was still trying to fight his imposter, and Pooh was being tossed helter-skelter all over the place. And the taxi made a particularly sharp swerve. Pooh went flying and ended up wedged in the small window of the taxi's partitions. "Hello," Pooh said jovially, when the cabbie caught sight of him out of the corner of his eye. That was it, the last straw. The cabbie could only handle so much. Letting out another scream, he threw his hands in the air, freed from any control, the steering wheel pulled to the left, and before anyone could do anything to stop it, the vehicle jumped the curb and went slamming into a newspaper stand. As the engine coughed and then died, Madeline and the others crawled out of the back of the taxi, brushing down her skirt. Madeline quickly checked the others to make sure they were all right. Behind her, a police officer raced up to the scene. "You need to arrest this lot," the cabbie shouted when the officer asked what was going on. The policeman looked over at Madeline. She was staying still, an innocent expression on her face, with 4 stuffed animals in her arms. He looked back at the cabbie. "The little girl and her stuffed toys give you a fright, did they?" He didn't even bother to hide his amusement. "Something's going on with that one," the cabbie said, shaking his head. "Something spooky." As the officer continued to question the cabbie, Madeline slowly began to back away from the accident. She was having a hard time keeping Tigger still and needed to get away. But how? Just then she felt a tiny tug on her sleeve. Looking down, she saw that Piglet was pointing at something ahead of them. "Madeline," he whispered, "look, doesn't that say Woozle?" Looking to where Piglet was pointing, Madeline's eyes brightened. There, parked next to the curb, half a block up, was a truck. On its side was written Winslow Luggage. As she watched, a few delivery men loaded some unfinished trunks into the back of the truck. She had an idea, but she had to act fast. "Officer," she said, gave the policeman's attention, "that's my father there." She spun and pointed at what she thought was the first respectable-looking man she saw. "All right, then," the officer said, taking her at her word. "Off you pop, but be careful." Madeline flashed her most innocent and sweet smile. "I will, thank you, officer." Then, before the officer could rethink just sending her off, Madeline dashed down the street and slipped into the back of the truck, moments before the delivery man slammed the door shut. Instantly, Madeline and the animals were plunged into darkness. But it didn't matter. If Madeline was right, which she usually was, this truck was headed toward the Winslow Luggage Building and her father. Snuggling into an open trunk, Madeline made herself comfortable. Beside her, Pooh pulled out a small travel-sized jar of honey and began to eat. "This truck should take us right to Winslow," Madeline explained as the truck rumbled along. "You mean the Woozle?" Pooh asked through a mouthful of honey. Madeline nodded. "That's right." Then she peered over the edge of the luggage trunk. The others were crammed together in the trunk down a ways. "How are you getting on in there?" In response, there was a flurry of limbs and noses moving about, and then she saw Tigger's tail. "It's close quarters," Piglet called back as he swatted Tigger's tail out of the way. They pulled himself up so he could just barely see Madeline and Pooh. "But we're all right." "Sit tight and we'll be there soon," Madeline called back. Nodding, Piglet sank back down. He looked at the other two. They were crammed against the trunk's side, the big brown folder between them. "What did she say, Piglet?" Tigger asked Piglet. "She said, 'Keep your tail out of my face,'" Piglet answered. Eeyore cocked his head and narrowed his eyes. Beside him, Tigger did the same. "That doesn't sound like Madeline," he said, curious. "Let me ask her." He shifted in the trunk, prepared to launch himself up and out, or at least up. Piglet tugged on his leg and shook his head. He didn't want a repeat of the disastrous taxi ride. His stomach couldn't handle it. Sometimes he wished Tigger would just sit still. "We have to be quiet, otherwise we'll get caught." "Got it," Tigger said, nodding across his heart. He popped up. "Madeline!" he shouted, causing Piglet to cringe. Just then the truck ran over a pothole. The trunk went bouncing up, connected to the vehicle by only a thin cord. Tigger went flying backwards so far that his head ended up on the bottom of the trunk, wedged between Piglet and Eeyore, and his tail was flopping in the open. As the truck slammed down, so did the top of the trunk, and landed with a loud thud right on Tigger's tail. "Ow!" Tigger cried, and then he let out another cry as Piglet and Eeyore tried to pull his tail free, but it was no use. The truck was bouncing around too much. They couldn't get a grip. And then, just when they thought things couldn't get worse, the truck hit another huge pothole and sent the trunk bouncing down the length of the track. With one more bump, the doors to the truck flew open and the trunk fell off the back onto the street below. Sparks began to fly as it and Tigger, Piglet, and Eeyore were dragged along like a sled. Inside her trunk, which had managed to stay open, Madeline thought she heard something. "Did you hear that?" she asked Pooh. Pooh looked up from his now empty jar of honey. "I can hear my tummy rumbling, that's for sure," he answered. Madeline shrugged. Must have been something outside, she thought. Whatever it was, it didn't matter, as long as they got to her father in time to help rescue him from the Woozle, or rather, Winslow. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter. See you next time.